Welcome back, everybody, to the DYOR Crypto Founders Report. And today our guest is Imran Ahmed. He is a professional integration analyst who is an expert in dynamic control systems. And as a systems expert, he's thought about money systems. His background gives him a fundamentally different approach to local, national, and global money systems. And he's going to share some facts and ideas with us today that's going to stretch and bend our minds just a little bit about money. Imran, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Mustafa.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on. So guys, as you know, Bitcoin is on the way up today. Price hit last night $55,000. Everybody's really happy, but at the same time, the stock market is tanking, which is kind of an anomaly. I can't remember how many times in history that's ever happened, but there's what that tells me is that it signals that there's a lot of uncertainty in the market right now and in economics in general. And I think it stems from what's going on right now at the federal level. What's going on with the Federal Reserve, all the quantitative easing that's happening, all the money printing that's happening right now. There's a lot of money being injected into the market, and then not only that, but there's a lot of talk about interest rates increasing and a reduction in quantitative easing, and it's causing a lot of havoc in the market. That's why we're seeing the stock market crash. And I think people see Bitcoin and cryptocurrency as a safe haven. There's a lot of research out there about it. Now, I met Imran because I saw him on a list of Cardano projects, and I'm a big member. I'm a big advocate of Cardano and love the Cardano community. Now, Imran has a very, very interesting take on money systems, and he sent me his white paper, and I read it, and it blew my mind. So, Imran, I want to ask you a question because in your whole thing is, even though you're a full stack software developer and you're an expert in systems, your whole thing is actually about money. And this is what I love about blockchain. It's the intersection of economics and computer science. So I think this is going to be a fantastic conversation. Imran, my first question is, can you explain to us what the modern monetary system is?
Yeah, I could try my best. It's I could go into like a 2-hour lecture, but I guess the first question is for a modern monetary system is how is money created, right? And before, when you had physical cash, we had the central banks or we had government printing money. And as many of you may know, is before that money was backed by gold. But recently, we had a transition to money that's not backed by anything, and it's only backed by the government's promise, or basically the government accepts it as legal tender. So that was a way for the government to basically create one currency for one nation without any competitors. After that, once we kind of started getting into digital banking, banks basically, or central banks had a mandate called fractional reserve banking, where banks would only have to hold X percent of actual cash in reserve. So that basically means that if you deposit $30, the banks are able to create $100 or $200 of loans based off central bank requirements.
So they're literally making the money up.
They're literally making money up by just inputting a few numbers onto a balance sheet, and that's just how it's created.
Mhm.
Uh,
So how does that have value? How does something that is basically made out of thin air have any value?
well, the value is basically comes from people's trust in their government.
Mhm.
So the value is that government will accept that as tax.
Mhm. I see. That makes
Yeah.
sense. So, and then if they do make this money, right? Like, how do they put it into the system? Do they just give it to people? I mean, they have in the
Yeah.
past, right?
Yeah. So when we're talking about banks, in this case, we're not talking about we're just talking about commercial banks. So this is, in America, this is kind of Goldman Sachs or Wells Fargo, any kind of retail bank. And this is when they're lending money. So when you're asking for a business loan, if you're asking for a credit card, if you're asking for basically anything that, how we transact. And yeah.
Yeah, that makes so when the Fed decides that they're going to have this, or when the federal government decides that we're going to have a 3.5 trillion dollar, stimulus or bill, basically to a spending bill, where can you describe sort of step by step how does that happen, and from a financial perspective, where does that money come from if they don't have it? Maybe you can describe that to us.
Yeah, so specifically for US, the Federal Reserve is a separate entity for compared to the government. So when the Federal Reserve or any central banks, their mandate is to kind of stabilize the economy and basically guide the economy. So in this case, we had some fallout from the pandemic, and the Fed is basically saying, okay, we need to stimulate the economy, and the best way we'll do that is lowering interest rates and basically quantitative easing, as you're saying. This is quantitative easing is an unconventional money approach, and it's classified under open market operations. And that basically means that the Federal Reserve will start buying assets on the market, and they'll be buying it with money that they printed.
Like stocks and gold and things like that.
I'm not sure exactly because,
Hmm.
for example, the Central Bank of Japan
Hmm.
buys private stocks.
Hmm.
However, the Federal Reserve have been historically limited to securities like government securities and treasuries and bonds. So, but they are kind of, it's something that they could definitely do, but they
Hmm.
haven't historically done yet.
I see. Yeah. So they're basically buying assets, and then the money that they use to buy those assets with are supposed to be put into the economy or whatever, or they go into the hands of the owners of the previous owners of the assets, but then there isn't really, is there any sort of mandate that says, oh, you have to put this has to get into the economy or something like that?
No, there is none. They basically strengthen commercial banks' balance sheets, hoping that that will incentivize the commercial banks to lend out more.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said on the white paper, the banks or commercial banks uh, kind of requirements for creating money or basically creating loans is the market for loans, if there's a demand for loans, the requirements as set by the central banks, which are right now pretty minimal, and just government regulations.
Yeah. Now, you have an interesting background, actually. You told me that you were born in Canada, but
Yeah.
you travel a bit, don't you?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm Bengali, and I would mainly, when I was growing up, I would travel to Bangladesh quite often. So it was pretty interesting seeing, developed countries like Canada, and then going back to developing country and seeing just how different life is there.
Hmm. And so, how did that sort of shape your view, your worldview on, the topics that we're talking about right now, especially when it comes to money and economics?
Yeah. So going to Bangladesh, you see a poor country, especially because Bangladesh is one of the largest textile manufacturers. So most of our clothing are from Bangladesh. So it just, growing up, it kind of like boggled my mind that, this country that supplies so much of the clothing for everyone else could be so poor for whatever reasons. And just seeing firsthand seeing the inequality in terms of how people are living was something that definitely shaped my view and what I want to do with my life.
Hmm. And so, when you, what did you get? How was your education? Like, what, how, where did you go to school at, and how did you become a software engineer and a full stack software developer, and how did you learn about blockchain? Those are sort of separate questions. We should
Yeah.
probably just start with, how did you get your education?
Okay, sure. Yeah, so I went to university for formal training in electrical engineering, but I did a few startups while I was in school, and I basically self-taught in full stack. Um, in terms of getting into blockchain, I've always been interested in economics, and as you said, right, like blockchain was a great way to have that intersection of computer science and economics, right? And I found it so interesting that, whether or not, certain projects in blockchain fail or succeed, it's an extremely exciting industry because I kind of think about it similar to papyrus in Egypt, which was basically as soon as you make it so that a random kid could just design an entire protocol or ecosystem and economy, it just really allows for anyone to challenge the status quo, which means that it's an environment ripe for innovation.
Exactly, especially when the technology and the tools are so inexpensive.
Exactly.
They're accessible to people who really can model all of history and basically, you know, grow it into an actual. Like, I'm really excited to see what happens in the next, like, few decades. I mean, like, I think something is gonna happen that wasn't expected. Um,
Yeah.
well, let me ask you this question. Peter Thiel has this question. He asks, um, "What's one thing that you believe in or agree with that almost nobody else would agree with you on or believes?"
Mm, okay. I think this is a pretty hot debate among my friends. It's basically, um, I don't think technology, in terms of climate change and whatever issues we have, I don't think technology will save us.
Wow. Tell me
Yeah.
more.
Basically, people are kind of saying, like, let's say we have nuclear fusion, right? And that would be world changing. We can have, crazy demand for energy or supply of energy. For me, that kind of just delays the inevitable, which means, like, in terms of our human behavior, sure, we kind of increase the supply, but we will reach there because when we have a lot of something, abundance of something, we tend to use it unwisely. So when we have crazy amount of energy, even back before when gas was super cheap, people would just do whatever with it because it's cheap. Why not? Uh, so I think that uh, like more structural, behavioral, and frankly, those are the harder things to do, right? Like how do you change the behavior of entire society? I think those things will actually make us more advanced as a society, and hopefully that will save us.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a scary time we're in right now. I've heard Charles Hoskinson mention before that we are at the edge. Like, this is a make or break time for us,
Yeah.
whether we go in a totalitarian direction or if we live in a free world. So I think it's very important to be having these conversations now because we're talking about it later in the future. It might be too late. The tools that we're developing now are the tools that are can enable someone to either free the world or at the same time oppress it. That's sort of a
Yeah.
yeah. That's okay. So now your white paper is actually about a fundamentally new money system, right? And it solves, it's maybe not solving the entire problem that we have right now, but it actually could supplement or could give an alternative. In my opinion, I think it's like an alternative system that could exist with other systems. That's just my take on how I interpreted it. But it's a really interesting money system, and I tried to, like, really grasp it. I got the gist of it, but I'd love for you to explain it a little bit more. So, what do you call this new system that you wrote about in your white paper?
Yeah, so I call the system Koru. Um, I don't know, I just kind of made it up.
Hmm.
But it's basically, it takes an age-old concept. It's actually as old as civilization itself. It's based off mutual credit. And that basically kind of thinks about what does money mean and who controls that, right? Uh, at the core of it, money is basically just a promise, right? Right now, we trust the banks to honor that balance, right? If I have $500 in the bank, then I trust that the bank will redeem that for me when I need to. Um, but this money system basically says that, okay, rather than having trust in institutions, such as banks or a third party credit union or whatever, you trust each other. And basically, if let's say you need something from me, or I'm buying a product off you, right? And there is no money system at all. I could say, okay, look, give me the product, and we could denominate it by whatever currency or whatever you want to call it, and I'll owe you one. And then you could say, okay, I Imran owes me something. I'm going to use that to buy something else. Um, so it's kind of like it's between barter system and what we have now, which is like a economy, like a bank-based economy, where you still have individuals issuing money, and it's still generalized. It's not. It doesn't really have the coincidence of wants problem. Basically, that you and I don't have to want the same thing or need the same thing. And yeah, so it just has individuals issuing money rather than having banks issuing money.
Hmm. So, how does one get the power to do something like that? How do you empower someone to issue money, literally?
Yeah, so the empowerment is kind of thinking about how we live in a society, right? We all have some friends or family or someone that we're connected to, and they have a certain degree of trust in you, right? And you to them. So the way the kind of money is printed is basically should be at least proportional to the trust that you have among someone. So, for example, tying this back to like blockchain, kind of challenging the core premise of money, before you had to have some kind of trust, they were saying, okay, we have no trust in anyone, but we can still transact with each other. In this case, it still requires trust, and that's not really a bad thing because we see trust as a way of building a community and building that kind of solidarity amongst your own community.
Yeah, I just to me the idea of trust is a very abstract one. Uh, it's like how do you like okay, we have credit scores, right? That
Yeah,
is sort of like in my mind that's like a quantified trust system. Like I
yeah,
can give somebody a score about how much I'm willing to trust him, and but then that's generalized across industries. So
yeah.
how do you translate that over to a system where, okay, I trust you. My credit score to you is whatever, 100% out of 100 or something.
Mhm.
And but how does that sort of generalize over to others, or how do you like, or do you have to build trust with each person individually?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that was kind of the issue, right? When mutual credit was used, it was often used amongst small communities, right? Where people generally knew each other. So, as you're saying, right, like how can you trust someone that you don't really know? Generally, before like we get into technology, they kind of worked not into trusting that, oh, that person's not going to run away, but it's more that it's mutual trust. So you trust them because you need them, and they trust you because they need you. So it's kind of looking at humanity in general.
Mhm.
If someone, uh, like, basically, that no man is an island, right? And for that reason, because we need each other, there is almost has to be trust because no one could actually survive without trust.
Hmm.
So that's how they kind of worked in ancient times, where um, it's either you trust or you frankly die, right?
Yeah, yeah.
In terms of, as you're saying, credit scores and using technology to kind of broaden that, that's what Koru is hoping to do, which is augmenting the previous mutual credit systems with a few mechanisms. We have like credit limits set democratically. So, for example, to use an analogy in blockchain, there's DAOs. So imagine everyone in the DAO gets to vote on the credit limits and the formulas set for those credit limits. This also allows community to lend to itself. So that's a great way for dynamic capital allocation without banks. Another thing, a few things we have is using distributed ledger technology to have basically, if you have everyone's transaction history and you're able to identify everyone, and you could also use zero knowledge systems such as Monero or Zcash, then you basically have a way to monitor everyone while still preserving privacy and have that trust because the credit scores are extremely transparent. And so you could audit anyone and they can audit you. So using these technologies, we hope to actually have not have one entire global community, not one kind of panacea like Bitcoin or any kind of crypto, but rather have still smaller groups, let's say a town or a city, and then you have cities transacting between other cities using their own currencies.
Hmm. So where do you see this being used?
I think the people who would have to gain the most out of it, actually, well, let me start with where it's being used right now.
Yeah.
There are some systems in UK. Actually, there was one system start in Canada. But what a lot of people found is that the people who have the gain the most are usually more impoverished communities. So, for example, grassroots economics did this. They basically went to this whole town in Kenya and they introduced a system, not really technology based, that's more paper based, and it really helped because it basically created liquidity where there was no liquidity, right? Because people didn't have the national currency, they were able to, actually live. So, for example, to answer your question, the like more developing countries or poor communities here in Canada, we have an issue with indigenous communities not getting enough. So that's a great place to start
Hmm.
to provide that liquidity where there is none.
So you must have a very I don't know what the word is, but um, sort of like a communal outlook on life, meaning that we all have to. You, as you mentioned, like you believe that no man is an island. We all have to work together. We don't trust each other, we die, basically.
Yeah.
And it's very true. So I'm guessing this. So what do you call this sort of outlook on? Do you have a name for it, or like how would you classify your philosophy on your worldview?
Um, yeah. So, you know, uh, I guess like nowadays, especially with the really sensitive political environment, someone might call it socialism, but it's not really exactly socialism because I still believe in competitiveness. But I don't really have a name for it. It's more
Mhm.
like balancing, capitalism and socialism so that we still have the benefits of competitiveness and we have, people still trying to innovate via competition or we have markets.
Mhm.
And then we have kind of the more communal cooperative environment where, okay, we're not trying to compete each other to a fault, right? We have companies going as far as committing fraud or corporate espionage, crazy things like that. So it's really just kind of, I would say, like more like a balanced view or attempting to balance both sides.
Yeah, because they're. I agree with you on the fact that they're, imbalance, for sure. I mean, it's very clear that there's a very small, high class, upper class, and a very big, lower class, and there is no middle class anymore. I don't care what anybody says. It's the middle class has been shrunk since like the 1950s,
Mhm.
and here in the United States and everywhere else in the world. I mean, most countries haven't even been able to get out of poverty in general,
Yeah.
in a lot of places. So I think there needs to be more people who are thinking on this kind of global problems, like yourself, um, and um, and I'm curious to know, how you found out about the Cardano community. Are you still a part of it?
Yeah. So originally, Koru started off as you said, Cardano proposal. Um, I first heard of Cardano. Actually, I don't remember where, but I remember I was very interested in the philosophy. Right, they didn't have much technology at the time, but their philosophy where they weren't just trying to create, oh, we're just going to create a high performance system and that's it. It's more about holistic and really trying to solve real problems. um, Maybe this would be too not good to say, but like Solana, for example, is a great project, very high performing system, but it was all basically privately funded, and it's kind of hard to actually get that to real people who need it. So the Cardano, uh, like specifically IOG, right? They have a very holistic view on not rejecting governments, but including them and actually strengthening the society, which I loved. I'm pretty much an idealist in that way.
Yeah.
And the proposal started off with basically having a community bank in a way on Cardano. But then we kind of started evolving that idea, and it basically came to be Koru.
Really cool. And how many people do you have on your team, or is it just you?
Right now, I'm the only full time on this. There's a few volunteers, but yeah, it's still quite early.
Yeah. And are you self-funding everything, or are you getting grants or anything like that?
Yeah, for now it is self-funding. So once we kind of get the white paper, once we get the idea kind of more concrete, then we'll be kind of, we're, I'm thinking of positioning it as a nonprofit
Hmm.
because that just would kind of make sense. And then from there, we'd probably get public funding via grants or whatnot.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see a working model, being used in a small community, of a few people or something like that. Like,
Mhm.
how far into the future do you think we can see this in action?
Well, hopefully like it goes far enough that it's bigger than me, right? In terms of already there are communities that do this, right? But they're kind of in small isolated pockets. There's Sardinia in Italy, where it's just like it's literally an island, right? And I hope that basically this system would just empower people who already want to do this.
Hmm.
So you provide the technology, you provide the blueprints, and because of natural forces, for example, our declining economic issues, climate change, people will naturally want to adopt this, and it's ready for them.
Yeah, because the hardest thing is to get people to want to use a system. Unfortunately, here in the United States, we've been running on the same system for since fractional reserve banking was created, basically, and that I don't think that's going to go anywhere anytime soon. And I think that the Federal Reserve is looking to build the U.S. coin, in order to not have to adopt into a sort of Bitcoin, um, world gold standard. Like I think they're going to create something that competes with Bitcoin, but Bitcoin's not going away. Like that's I think Bitcoin goes transcends everything. It really does. So, they probably will control some Bitcoin at some point. In my opinion, I think the Fed is going to control some of the Bitcoin, as they do with gold right now. But even though we're not on a gold standard anymore, they still have a lot of gold, probably more gold than ever before. Um, but I would love to see your system being implemented in like a place where people already are using the system, like you mentioned in
Yeah.
Sardinia. There's not a lot of convincing you have to do there. You don't have to change people's habits. It's just you're going to make it easier for them to do what they're already doing. But
Yeah.
I'm very interested in the way you think because I never even heard of um, Koru or mutual based credit systems before I read your white paper. So as soon as I read that, I was like, I got to talk to you because you have. I never even thought like it's hard for people who are in the system like myself who are like embedded in it to conceive of something that's like not even like it's very much the opposite. So, but I really like that idea. How can people who want to help you with this mission, how can they reach out to you?
The best way is probably via email or Discord. If you have the website linked, the website should have all the contact information. That would be the best place, and I'm always looking for insight, feedback, any kind of support, whether it be, oh, hey, have you thought about this, or someone who says I want to donate. There's lots of possibilities.
And the white paper will be published on your website at some point.
Yeah.
It's okay. So if it's not already up, it'll probably be up by the time people get to this video. And I hope that if there's someone out there who's watching who wants to help with funding, granting, or experimenting with Imran, to just reach out to him. But I think this has been a great episode, DYOR Crypto Founders Report. I'm your host, Mustafa, and this is Imran Ahmed. He's our guest today, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks for coming on the show, Imran.
Thanks, guys.